like, it is a brutal fucking movie. There's so much more blood. The girls just murder a dude at the very end, and it's just like, oh, and there's fires, and then like credits.
Yeah, it just he's like standing there, and it's just like, it's over. We are the Planet of the Apes.
Welcome to Certain POV's Another Pass podcast with Case and Sam, where we take another look at movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Let's see how we could have fixed them.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
And today we are closing the chrono loop of time in this weird backwards progression through the original Planet of the Apes movies. And to do that, we are joined for our conversation about Conquest of the Planet of the Apes by Kale Ryder.
Hey, it's me, Kale.
Kale, thank you for coming on. I'm so glad that Matt introduced us and that connected you in our goal to find people who could actually talk about this really weird franchise.
Yeah, I love Matt. I love them to death. And yeah, that was awesome when they were like, oh yeah, you should definitely have them on. I was like, yes, I love Planet of the Apes. I love Conquest, especially because it's so different, yet so much fits the vibe of everything. I love it.
Well, so that gets to my second question. But first question is, for the people at home, who are you? Like, where can they find you? What might they know you from?
I edit porn. That's my day job.
That's awesome.
Yeah. No, you can find me on twitch.tv/Kale Ryder or Twitter @Kale Ryder. Sometimes I do a show about movies, movie news. Like I broke down all the stuff about HBO Max recently and had some insider information about it. So like, yeah, I usually cover entertainment stuff and play video games on Twitch or have mental breakdowns on camera. So
entertainment for all.
Yeah, exactly.
In this world, like who could blame you for any of that?
Exactly.
I mean, it's not like we're in some sort of weird totalitarian apocalypse where the police are just beating, primates down in horrible ways.
Yeah, and forcing them to have injections, even though that's against their culture.
Yeah, man, this movie hits different. Hits different. But on that note, what is your association with the Planet of the Apes franchise?
So like just a weird ass history. Like I grew up watching the original one on TV, and then like the first VHS I ever bought was Beneath the Planet of the Apes. So like I've been on it for a long time, and then I think it was in high school they had like the DVD collection of them all for like $5. And then I think like 5 years ago I bought the regular Blu-ray because this was also $5. Like, yeah, so I've watched it mostly throughout my life, but I was like older when I watched Escape and Conquest. I still haven't watched Battle yet. So
Battle's rough.
I enjoyed it. I think you should watch it.
Okay. Eventually, someday I'll watch it. I kind of want to go back and watch the Tim Burton, and like I haven't even watched the last Matt Reeves one yet. So
I'm gonna say,
you definitely should check that first.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe just watch Battle, get it out of the way, because they didn't have a lot of money. So just do it, rip it off like a Band-Aid, and then go watch something that money was put into.
Yeah.
And that has actual effects.
Yeah, like the Tim Burton one, where Tim Roth. Yes, Tim Roth is the main bad guy.
Yeah. So in prep for this episode, I actually went back and listened to one of our earliest episodes of the show, which was on the Tim Burton one. And I was surprised at one, like just no matter what, I can always just hear how much I love this franchise every time I'm talking about it. And how mad I was on having just rewatched it for the podcast at the Tim Burton movie, because because there's so many things that are just like, oh yeah, they just didn't have a thing that they were trying to say with that movie compared to these ones, at least, and compared to the more recent trilogy. It's the one that can easily just be kind of tossed aside. And then I would argue that it's like kind of tied for last between the Tim Burton, the Beneath, and Battle. But honestly, after the rewatch for this show, like Battle's kind of creeping up there a little bit, and I'm curious to see how Beneath's gonna hold out. So like Tim Burton might be like sliding firmly into the final spot.
Yeah, no, I like going back and watching this, I was like, oh, Tim Burton understood everything about like the old ones, like aesthetically, just like the story was like not good in that one.
Like beautiful costumes.
Yeah.
wonderful setups. Like the actual sets that they use, like the treehouse city that they were in, very cool looking.
Yeah.
Fucking nothing being said out loud.
Well, yeah, and then Michael Clark Duncan's character doesn't even show up until Beneath the Planet of the Apes, so I thought that was interesting. When watching it again, I was like, oh, this character doesn't show up until the sequels, so they at least gave a little bit of attention to the sequels. And Caesar is the one monkey that gets lost.
Yeah, and there's time travel, which isn't really in the first movie either. It's more of an invention of Beneath to justify a sequel. So yeah. I mean, like, clearly they were familiar with the franchise. It just feels like someone was vomiting up all the things that they remembered about the franchise without trying to actually like get it into the bird's mouth.
Yeah, dig into what actually makes this thing like has lived on for like 70 years or something now, almost.
Yeah.
But
I do think it's interesting to look at the franchise now that we do have the Matt Reeves movies, or like the Andy Serkis ones, since Reeves didn't direct the first, or Rise, in that it does create this sort of now open loop. Like originally the franchise, because there's debate about how things are going to go after a battle. Like at the end of the movie, you are left thinking, oh, either we're going to descend into the same sort of schism where humanity is a subservient class to the apes and like are being pushed into bestiality. That's not the right word.
yeah, I was like, what?
No, that's Justin special. He just loves bestiality.
I guess, you know, I'm not going to kink shame anyone, but what? Case?
Yeah, sorry. Into an atavistic regression, we'll say.
Yes, okay.
Use a $10 word instead of a $5. But if you look at it from the perspective of the larger franchise, because there is also room for humanity to actually find peace with the apes at the end of battle, it could be a scenario where it creates actually a loop where Rise becomes the first movie in the franchise chronologically, and then you follow that story of the ascension of the Planet of the Apes. And then you go to the first movie where it's the astronauts that they say they lose contact with in Rise, and they end up in the future, and then the apes come back in time, and then we actually break the timeline as a possibility. And that's all I think kind of interesting.
Yeah, like Rises goes straight into Chuck Heston's one, whereas like, well, I mean, not really, because they left in the 70s, but like, and then Conquest and all that is its own alternate timeline, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, like, because like looking at Conquest, I think is doing a lot of things really right, but there are some interesting choices that they are making, and a lot of it's budget and a lot of it is who they could get, that make the timeline really weird, because this is set in 1991. Like, I don't know about you, I don't remember us all having ape servants in 1991. I probably would have been very down with it, and I would have wanted them to be my best friend.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But you know, because
other than that, it looked just like 1991.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like
all the fashions,
the way everybody dressed. It was
fashions,
just
the hair,
the Cold War was still going on.
All of that stuff. Very much. I mean, all of our government officials wore all black, everywhere. No suits, no ties. Very clean military kind of uniforms. It was amazing. The 90s was very clean cut decade.
They got the architecture perfect.
Can you imagine if they actually got the fashion choices perfect? Like if it was like fascist Jinko jeans.
Yeah.
UFO pants.
Yeah.
Like everyone is wearing plaid overshirts, but they're all black with like gray trim instead.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So the timeline is a weird part here looking at this movie, like regardless of anything else. And like there's so many things that are like, it's technically a problem, but it's not a thing that ruins my enjoyment of this movie. And so like we just pick up from the teaser at the end of Escape, where it's like, oh yeah, the baby survived and Ricardo Montalban has the baby. And so now it's an adult, and it's only, you know, it's like 18 years after that movie, and all of a sudden we have slave ape society, and they're getting smarter, and they're being utilized that way. And there's a lot of apes also, which is a note I have just in terms of like the numbers. Like there aren't that many apes in the real world. They are very endangered.
Yeah, those female apes really want to get fucked real hard. Like the way she was looking.
Well, I think it's because she already had an interaction with him, like at the bookstore. So she was like, But they're breeding them specifically because they're, you know, they're of high value. Clearly, I mean, so this is a business. So yes, business is booming, and so the population is booming. Yeah,
but like population boom though, but apes don't age that fast. Is I guess what I'm getting at. Like,
well, okay, that's fair.
I mean, they would have really had to, like, because the actual timeline is like, okay, the plague that hits all the cats and dogs was 8 years prior. So it's not even going back to the 70s. So from 1983 to now, like I'm saying, objectively, it doesn't work from like the practical standpoints. Again, it doesn't ruin this movie for me because I get that probably they wanted it to stay as the direct child as opposed to like the descendant of Cornelius's era. Like they didn't want like a great grandchild. Yeah. So they probably wanted to keep it being direct, and they wanted Ricardo Montalban because, of course, if you have Ricardo Montalban, like you want to use him.
Yeah, he kind of stuck around longer than he should have. But I did not complain while watching.
Yeah, he makes terrible choices in this movie. Yeah. But, like, I'm glad he's there.
No, I said inhuman. Like, okay.
Like, his adamant, like, nature of being like, no, I have it documented. It's the first ape born in a circus. And, like...
There have been 4 born in L.A. oh, but that is a zoo.
He's so passionate about that all. And it does, like, I almost start to believe him at some point. Mostly because he is so charming, and he's talking about the most banal thing in a way that you're like, okay, sure, I guess I believe you because like you're charming enough that I don't want to actually investigate this further. And like you sell that part of the character there, but you know, it's the movie is very straightforward. It's very straight to the point. Everything about it is like, all right, well, we showed some pretty brutal stuff, and now we're gonna have Ricardo Montalban give like so much exposition.
Yeah, they definitely covered the exposition, and they made it his job for the most part in the beginning of the film. It's like, no, you can't do this because this is what humans do now. No, you can't do this because you will be in trouble if anyone finds out you speak. Like, just in case anyone didn't watch the movies prior to this and didn't know, don't worry. Armando is there to tell you everything you missed.
I love in movies when they do that. Like most recently in that Without Remorse, there's this actor Coleman Domingo. I love him, but he's in one scene and he's just there to give exposition. Like just ask the question, like ask the dudes like history and stuff. So I love when they just have like one character in a movie played by someone who's relatively famous and has a very good voice to just give exposition so it doesn't feel so forced because you're just like, I love your voice.
Yeah. And it works well here with this dynamic of like Armando being this like father figure to Caesar. So like that makes sense. And like there is an element of being like, how does Caesar not know? But he's also been like they do drop lines that he's been shielded from all this.
Yeah.
So I get all that. And then like the look of this movie is right. The what they're going for is appropriately brutal for about what you could subject to a PG audience.
Yeah.
I think is the thing that I keep coming back to. I'm like, holy shit.
Well, and it's like the only one that's rated PG too. Like all the rest
the others are all G.
In the I think especially even before you get to the end, which is fairly brutal, but like the conditioning area where it's basically a torture area. It's very open and like you're seeing all this thing and they're just kind of walking Caesar through while he's watching different apes get to experience horrible things. I was like, oh, okay, this is where this movie is going. I forgot that this is where this movie was going. Yeah. I must have blocked it out.
Well, they conditioned you not to remember it.
Yeah. I was afraid I'd forgotten all of it while watching it, even though I did watch the extended cut. I think I've watched the original cut before because from DVD to Blu-ray. But yeah, I was like, oh no, I remember all of this. I remember how brutal it was, and like now I'm like, oh, it makes sense for who I am in the year 2022. Why I still love this movie so much because of its revolutionary attitude towards in the face of fascistic whatever.
I mean, there is the director, like just this entire film. There is no like, what is this film trying to say? You can't misinterpret what this film is trying to say about race, about fascism, about slavery, about complex issues that like this movie's like, no, this is terrible. Are we going to put a black man in it? Yes. Are we going to make him the only black man surrounded by white men that have microaggressions pointed at him? Absolutely. Is he going to be the only person who somewhat sympathizes with the apes? Yes. Is someone going to make a microaggression terrible comment about it figures? Yes, they are. Like there is no way. There is a very clear line of what this movie is trying to say, and it is brutal at every turn and very, very direct.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't pull any punches. I might be worried that this movie might punch too hard at some spots. Like, there's like the issue sometimes of when we try to talk about fascism, we can't help but point to like the most extreme example that we're all familiar with, which is like Nazi iconography. And sometimes you have to remind people that like, no, it starts smaller than that and it works its way up. But this movie is also like fully in like, no, we all just agreed. We're like, we're fully into like fascist future where we have a slave state. Like,
yeah,
that's pretty rough. Sam, I'm glad you brought up the conditioning, though, because I do want to apologize to listeners of the last episode because I was venting about how
I was thinking about it. Go on.
I thought that the no thing in Battle for the Planet of the Apes, where it's like such a trigger in conversations for them all, I thought that was a little too much and like kind of not that well done. And I forgot just how directly they are being specifically conditioned to the word no, not just to commands from people in this movie. I still think that the scene itself is bad in Battle where they like deal with it all, but I do realize like, oh god, yeah, I just had forgotten like that. It's like, oh no, they like strap them to chairs and electrocute them while shouting no at them in this movie, and like put them in a room with flashing lights, shout like blaring no while they're being beaten with batons to train them. Like this movie is so rough like in terms of what it does to its protagonists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was thinking about that when I was watching this and I was like, ha, yes. And I did agree with you that I didn't particularly like the scene and I felt that it should be handled in a slightly different way, but that I still felt that it was very fair and I feel very vindicated. I'm glad you apologized to the listeners. I'm going to take it as an apology to me. Thank you very much.
Sure, I guess. I don't know, because like we were going around circles being surprised at how much we liked so many of the things in Battle, even though it's notoriously like a bad one that has a low budget and the makeup's just not as good and there's all these things kind of going for it. I don't think that's really a big issue for this movie. I think that they do a really good job across the board in terms of, they take advantage of Sentry City looking more futuristic, or at least it looks very like artificial and concrete. It looks fine as a setting for here's future world. They pull suits, or like all the jumpsuits that the apes wear are pulled from other movies. And I think that's a good call. And it was a thing that I was annoyed about in Battle, where all of a sudden they just revert to wearing like the ape clothes of the future, and I felt like that was just like, clearly you don't have money to do your own costumes and you're just grabbing old costumes. Why couldn't you grab costumes from a different movie? So it's not just like, oh yeah, well, our fashion will be the same for hundreds of years and we immediately settle into it. This movie does not have that problem. This movie, while they keep the color coding, and I like the idea that the color coding that the apes exhibit in their fashion choices in the future is actually still them replicating choices that were put upon them by humanity, because they have not transcended our oppression as much as they thought they had. I like that we've got these like these jumpsuits for all the characters. I think that that's a cool look that is appropriate for this slave class. I don't yeah
it fits into that fascist aesthetic of owning people and knowing, like, essentially giving them color coding because they have to do certain jobs, like certain classes do certain jobs. Like, it's beautiful and disgusting.
Yeah, no, beautiful and disgusting. I like that. No, but they like to categorize people, right? It's like that is very much part of the fascist system. Like, it makes it easier to know who is who and to separate people from each other. And so it makes so much sense. And it is lovely that it like, it's a nice touch. Not that the color coding is lovely. It is a nice touch that pulls into their future. Kind of what their styling would be like. This is what we associate with. This is the color my people have always worn.
Yeah, and then it also goes into like how they're still like divided even till the end of the planet, like, because ultimately, even though they come together to do a conquest of the planet, what ultimately ends them is how divided they still are, because there's like pure science, there's religion science, and then there's just the military brutes.
Yeah. Like, I was thinking about the gorillas as the brutes concept, and I think that the original movie just sort of like rolled with it because it made the most sense to have like the big scary ape be the military one in that scenario. I do think that it would have been nice if in this movie, and I don't know if there's a way to like work this into a pitch per se or like part of a pitch, if the violence that's being perpetrated on the gorillas is human based in terms of like why then they become the sort of violent perpetuators of that, like why they become the police state themselves, because gorillas are famously like the most docile of the apes in terms of what they're going to do, because who's going to fuck with them?
Yeah.
like they're not going to attack and do all the terrible things. Not to say that they won't ever, but relatively speaking, like which one's going to do it? Chimpanzees probably more likely, and orangutans are known to be very scary to approach.
Yeah.
And then also like, because gorillas are bigger than most other primates. So like they would probably do like the heavy labor and like, I mean, they basically did that where they were all cleaning or stuff like that. So yeah, that would be interesting if it was more like, if there was more of a, like if they showed more, like they got more abused and like the chimpanzees were more used for intelligent based things like fetching, things like that. Even though whenever Caesar gets a piece of paper from a random ape, it's always a gorilla, but still.
Yeah.
Well, they're carrying things back home. That's for the most part. So maybe it is heavy lifting still.
Yeah. Well, and then they're like all the chimpanzees are filing in the government building.
Yeah, that didn't fucking make any sense for me. Like in terms of like, wait, you have them like putting things by number. Like you're trying to have them sort. Like like this is too far down the line in terms of how smart they're supposed to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting in this movie is that we don't see a lot of orangutans, actually. Like, we only see one that I can think of in actual captivity, and then we see the cage that he comes in with. So there's, like, some shots of them there. But they don't spend a lot of time showing them in any particular position, which I just thought was interesting. The one time we see one is in the bookshop, that when Armando and Caesar come into, and Lisa's, like, picking up a book for her owner. And like an orangutan's the one who's like supposed to pull it, and he pulls down a philosophy book. And I thought that was like kind of a cool element there of like, oh, this is what they kind of gravitate towards.
Yeah.
But and it might just be by virtue of the types of jobs they're assigned to. We just don't see them particularly often. But I thought it was like interesting just that we weren't getting them, it's mostly gorillas and chimpanzees in this movie.
Well, even at like the end, you can barely see any in the big fight scene.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Because I did like, for example, when Caesar sneaks in, I like two parts of like how he sneaks into captivity. I like that when he decides to like strip down and like jump into a thing of apes, that he does have immediately this bond with the orangutans, and that sort of feels like setting up the dynamic of the orangutans being the trusted advisors who then take on this sort of, administrative role in society.
Yeah.
It felt kind of like the way it's like, yeah, let's have Maurice be an orangutan in the more recent movies, so that it, we can set up Dr. Zaius as like this, this lineage of lawgivers who are all part of it's the hand of the king if the king was Caesar kind of situation, and moving along with this sort of like this regency. So I like that they were there and they had that like kind of interaction where it seemed that like Caesar was able to calm these apes down, and this is his first real time bonding with other apes and whatnot. And then I like that, they address like, oh yeah, Borneo doesn't have chimpanzees. I thought that was like a good detail from the like, this movie is still in theory like a family friendly movie that like kids are supposed to watch. And like, that's the kind of like pop science that I thought was appropriate for those kind of things. Cause like if you're a kid and you're into apes, you're like, orangutans are in Asia, chimpanzees are in Africa.
They can't be together. How'd they get to New York?
Well, and then it's like a cool detail for then like how he gets found out. I thought, it works. You as an audience member feel smart because you probably noticed it too. And they're like, oh yeah, we're with you. We're all just as smart.
And if you weren't just as smart, you learned something new. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Watching these in reverse, Culp, the CIA guy, I like a lot more in this movie than in Battle. In Battle, yes. He's like fully crazy and like doesn't seem to have like real rational plans for anything. In this movie, he's actually pretty scary.
Yeah,
as this, like, I'm going to torture you guy.
Incredibly menacing and clearly a driving force in this government. Like he is very much out for blood and very much like ready to convince the governor of anything to get his chance to do away with the threat that might be, but also keep like all these apes under control. And he's like hungry for it too. Like, you know, you can tell it's a great bad guy in this one.
Yeah.
Definitely really, really scary.
Yeah, and he motivates one of the really big scenes that McDowell gets, like by virtue of killing Armando. We then, you know, he like sneaks off just to cry into the night. I thought was such a cool performance there.
Yeah.
Yeah, like McDowell is given so much work in this movie playing his own son. Like he's gets to be a smart ape pretending to be a dumber ape in all those sequences, and he's like kind of going overboard. He's like trying to gnaw on everyone's like clothes and stuff.
Yeah,
you know,
that was funny.
He gets that big dramatic scene like that we just mentioned of him crying about when he finds out that Armando is dead. We get the sequences of him like learning to sort of control the apes, which I thought were pretty good. You know, like when him breaking up the banana and like giving it to the other chimpanzees, like that's a pretty good moment there.
Yeah.
And then we get the speech at the end, and that's like it's a tour de force for an actor. Like they're like, all right, the world is burning and you're going to say why it's a good thing, man. Go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing speech.
Yeah, I mean, it riled me up. But at first they're just like, you're going to stand there for like a good 5 minutes just looking around while everybody's dying. And then someone's going to ask you something. And then you got to speak for 20 minutes about why burning everything to the ground is actually a good idea.
Yeah. Ooh. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Kale, you mentioned that you watched the extended cut for this, and we've alluded to it at this point. So this movie was initially screened with the hope of getting a PG rating, but thinking it was probably a G was in their head. And then the test audiences reacted horribly to this movie. It was thought to be too violent and too scary, and like, you know, about a slave uprising against a fascist state that people in 1972 just didn't think this was like good for kids. And so again, it's marketed as the extended cut. I need to double check this because the only thing I know of that's like very overt, because rewatching them back to back, like, yeah, there's more blood. There's like a few more, like a few longer shots. They added a speech for the theatrical cut where after Caesar gives the whole like, this is it. This is why we're doing it. Like, as far as I can tell, that speech happens just the exact same between the two cuts, and then it cuts to a close up on his eyes, and so you can't see his mouth, and then reaction shots from people, and they have Roddy McDowell in what is very clearly ADR, like very clearly dubbed, and does not match the audio levels just don't quite match what his previous speech was. He gives this whole speech about how like, but God wants us to be humane to the people so that we're better masters to them as slaves as opposed to the way it was under them. And it's this very awkward bit. And it, you know, and then it ends with him being like, and this is the birth of the Planet of the Apes, and it cuts. But it's supposed to imply that like, all right, well, Caesar's not gonna be quite as bad. And like, it's really interesting that that's the movie that got released, and that it's the thing that allows for the timeline possibly to not be a closed loop, because censors and like test audiences were like too scared.
Yeah.
Well, it is terrifying. I mean, if the end goes the way it was originally planned, right? And Caesar just says, and that time is now, and then humans are just murdered, and that's the end of the movie. That's terrifying, because one of the things that this movie does and does well, which a lot of old science fiction is amazing at, it's not good at subtlety, right? What it's good at being like, hey, you might be messed up. This might actually be a reflection of you. You might not actually be the apes. You are a person. And that hits a little tinge of like guilt, right? That hits like a little like, oh no, am I the baddie? Yes, you are the frickin' baddie. And especially since this is such a direct, I mean, like, how many parallels can we really bring? Like, if we're talking about race and you clearly have the only character that is the objector is a black man, I am telling you, there is some white guilt saying this movie is too scary. Like, that is just like an actual reality. And that's not something that the people in the 70s were unaware of. Maybe they didn't have all the language we have, but James Baldwin was already writing. So like the people had already marched, you know, like people, like the civil rights movement has already occurred, like is still going on, you know, so this is not something that they're not aware of. This movie is very clearly saying this. And that end is like, yeah, you deserve to burn. And it's like, that's fucking scary because that's part of it, right? Like, so put it there, like, don't worry, we'll forgive you. God wants us to be merciful and humane, and everyone should just be nice to each other. We can all be friends. You know, just soften that shit right up.
Yeah.
Right.
Like what I call like a Star Trek ending where it's like, sure, they're bad, but I think they learned a lesson. So let's just never talk about it again.
Yeah, it's interesting to compare this movie now, or like looking at this movie now, where we've gotten Rise and the Circus trilogy, where like we can kind of deal with it from a different perspective. Like, so in Escape from the Planet of the Apes, we get a layout of a timeline of humanity losing their pets, bringing apes in as pets, eventually realizing they can teach them to do tricks, eventually putting them into bondage as slaves, and getting this whole like timeline of this like rise of fascism built and this rise of slavery built around convenience for people. And it starts with necessity. Like it starts with this like human need to have animal companionship, and the only things that are really left alive are apes in the wake of this like virus that runs rampant. And in Rise, we get a version of that timeline where on the surface it's like, oh well, but that's not quite it, you know, it's not as bad. But from the apes' perspective in this movie, where they're all in bondage, they're all being tortured, they're all being medically experimented on, they have all these things going for them. Effectively, it's the same thing. It's just we're not seeing it from their eyes because we're used to the idea of animal testing. We're used to those kind of, you know, we're used to the idea of circus apes. We're used to the like all these ideas in there, and where we get like this much more subtle version of that. But from their vantage point is the same. Like it you know, it doesn't matter if we as, you know, 20th century, 21st century Americans can be like, oh, but the Nazis were like the really bad fascists. Like all you have to point to is like some terrible situation. Like the worst thing that the apes as the victims of this like oppression have experienced. Like, yeah, just because you can imagine a version that's less subtle or, you know, more like boots treading on you kind of situation that's like even more harsh or even more like, you know, aesthetically like gross. Like it doesn't change the fact that they're still in this horrible situation in what is effectively the real world of us like testing them or like testing on them, murdering their parents and stealing their babies and pulling them out of the wild, putting them in zoos, putting them in cages, putting them in whatever, putting them in rocket ships and throwing them into space and then like probably dying in most of those scenarios. Like, you know, it's so, this is what I was saying about the movie might almost be punching too hard at some moments because it is going all the way to like full on Nazi and not like reeling back to be, you know, so it feels like, how could we ever go that far? Mm-hmm. And what the truth is, it's rather easy. It's just small steps along the way. You like, jumping 20 years from the last movie to being like, oh yeah, we're full on Nazis right now. And having only one person being like, what the fuck happened? Like McDonald's the only one being like, I don't understand how we got here. Like, this wasn't what I signed up for. Like, I think that's the one thing that the movie is like, because they really wanted to show this scene. They really wanted to show like the future that had been talked about in the previous movie that we like race there, and like they're like, okay, we got Ricardo Montalban and we got Roddy McDowall like playing his own son, and like these are all things that audiences are gonna really like, and who's gonna really care? And look, ultimately I don't really care. Like I like this movie a lot. I think that the fact that it doesn't make sense timeline wise is fine. I wish that maybe this movie wasn't defanged in the edit somewhat, but it is pretty brutal.
Can we talk about the silence that happens as the two armies, the human army and the ape army, are facing each other? Because that was so wonderfully done in terms of like building suspense. Like we talk a lot about in this podcast how like music and scores can lend to, but like sometimes just silence, because it was just like, for a second there I was like, wait, did my sound go out? And then I was like, and then there was just like a very small like kind of pin drop, and I was like, oh no, it's quiet on purpose. Like this is to build the tension, because we're as carefully listening for the first shot or the first, you know, blow or whatever explosion that's going to happen as everyone else in the scene. So it's building this tension and putting you right exactly where the characters are in that moment. I think that's so wonderful and brilliant, and I loved it.
Yeah, and that scene, like the apes aren't very visible at first either, because the humans like all march out. They've all got like their riot shields and their guns and whatnot, and you just see them like lining up against shadow, and then you just start to see like little bits of like the red jumpsuits, like catching a little bit of light, starting to like become silhouettes, and then eventually they emerge.
Yeah, it's actually really great because there's like this, you get the close-up of them all lined up, ready with their shields. They're like heavily armored with guns, and they're standing there. And then you get this like long shot really far away. So you just see like their formation, like in a like perpendicular line. And then you see like some movement behind them and in front of them, but it's like really hard to see. And it's just all silence. And that would be terrifying as a human, no matter how armed you are. But it's just terrifying on both fronts.
That scene read to me as like a zombie movie scene when I was watching it last night. I was like, oh yeah, like we're with the apes on this one, but if you weren't, this would look like some sort of, unhuman horde kind of emerging from the darkness, quietly ready to like shatter your head in with the butt of a rifle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That slow creeping feeling is one of the top tier feelings, and like, yeah, just besides the weird cuts whenever an ape would get shot, it's some very good editing and shot extremely well. But like, this is the other thing, like the light and shadow, and like what they teach you in film school is like to, like, you usually a scene like that would have a little bit more light, and then like yesterday I saw bodies, which like does the exact opposite, where everything is just super dark and you can't really see anything. So like I always appreciate when it's like super dark and there's just the right amount of light to show something, to where it's not like a blank screen and boring, but like, yeah, just to show the darkness, and then the fire coming up, the subtly creeping fire to cleanse the earth. Good job to the director and the DP.
Yeah, I mean, this is a weird one to talk about because it's very to the point and it's not very long, so there's not like a lot of like crust to like cut away or anything like that. Like, we established we got our ape. He's in slavery real quick, and he's tortured for a while, and he leads an uprising pretty fast, and then everything happens and burns. Everything burns like by the end.
Yeah, this concrete city burns to the ground.
Yeah, like this movie, it goes back and forth with Escape in terms of which one I'm more into. Like, I love them both for very obviously different reasons. But it is it's a strong movie. Like, it's this is the reason why people talk about the broader franchise. Like, the fact that you can get to this point in this whole series after the initial subversion of human roles in the first one, and then Beneath is whatever, and Escape is just so strange, and then you get to this movie and you're like, oh man, that's a gut punch right there. And it's like kind of how the franchise really ends. Like, no matter what your thoughts on Battle are, it still feels like an epilogue. This is the movie where it's like, all right, yeah, like now we're seeing how it happens. Like, oh yeah, the apes have risen up, and you're kind of with them for it, and like kind of there for human society being ripped apart by them because we have clearly made such a mess of it all.
Yeah, because that persistent storyline through it, to where like at the end of the first one, we find out we nuked ourselves into oblivion. And like just sort of seeing that weave in and out with especially Escape and Conquest, to see like, oh no, we kind of do deserve it, because our first reaction to us maybe being the lower class of species is to just murder a baby.
Right.
So
yep,
maybe we kind of do deserve this.
And not only like murder the parents and the baby, but then subjugate the rest of their species and species like them into slavery, into servitude, and like making sure that like you keep tabs on their intelligence and their growth, to make sure that somehow this future that you heard may or may not happen doesn't happen, but you're going about it through violence, right? So like, no matter what, you're inflicting the pain upon these species that is going to make them want to do exactly what they are possibly, depending on who you speak to, destined to do in this timeline.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and then all the audiences are aware of that's what they're getting into, because I watched the trailer for this movie. I think pretty much all the Planet of the Apes movie trailers like spell out the entire plot. Like, I always like point out like how ridiculous the Escape one is, because it even shows them like on the run at the very end. Like, and the trailer for Conquest ends at the Night of Fires with Caesar giving the speech, and like a lot of the speech is in the trailer, and it's like, wait, hold on. Like, are trailers at this time just Cliff Notes versions of the movie?
Yes, they are. Absolutely. If you watch any like trailers from this time period, they will be almost the same, like the entire movie. It is ridiculous. And yeah, I love watching old trailers because it does it all the time. It gives away everything.
Yeah.
But it is crazy that it has the whole speech in there.
Yeah, that would be ridiculous. I mean, if I was a Planet of the Apes fan in the 70s, I would be mad. But luckily I'm not.
Sort of. I mean, there's also the appeal of kind of just seeing how a thing plays out and not have. I mean, first of all, it doesn't tell you that that's the end of the movie. I guess I would be a little annoyed if it's like, literally they showed the last shot. Kind of like the way the Amazing Spider-Man 2 trailers had him like swinging in to fight Rhino, and it's just like, wait, that's where you ran the trailer or the credits. Like that's a weird choice. But there is an element of just seeing how it plays out, and this movie is definitely doing that because like we already knew like what happened. Like we know that eventually there was some kind, like apes were put to work so that they could do this whole monkey see, monkey do thing where like, all right, they start doing the tasks. And then when humans are gone, they just keep doing the tasks. And, you know, from the vantage point of someone like zoomed out, like, oh yeah, the society is just continuing on and it's all fine, you know, because the argument of the franchise as a whole isn't necessarily that like apes specifically are going to be the thing that kind of replaces us. It's just that like, we're all eventually getting turned into automatons of some kind, whether it's a trained animal or if it's a machine or if it's just a person who doesn't understand what they're doing in the first place. If it's humanity being like stripped away from people and they're being put into these roles where they're just going through the motions and have no actual like thought or passion or growth or humanity. I mean, the humans in this movie are stripped of their humanity before it even starts. Like they're all wearing blacks in a way, you know, all the apes have color and they all have life and there seems to be a culture to them. Like even the fears are being stripped away from the humans. Like the comment about cigarettes no longer killing them, you know, like, which is just a weird note to throw in there. It's like, oh yeah, it's the future, guys. We figured out the smoking thing. But you know, we don't see art. Like their architecture has become very austere, very brutal. Like, what is the point of living in this world? Well, there isn't. Like, humanity's already like given away their humanity, and ape kind might have a chance, but like we know that they're kind of going to fall into the same tropes also. Yeah,
and like that protest scene, like where it's like, you know, you could put it into like immigration at the time, or you know, automation. Like in the future, like all our jobs will be automated, and so people would protest that. Like, I thought that was a pretty cool. And then even like the protest could only last for like 2 hours or something. Like the fascist government was like, okay, you can protest, but you're going to be gone in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like even shit like that was fascinating. Like just the way they came up with all the things of the future, the fascist future.
Did you notice how or not all the cops, but like many of the cops that were like actually involved with like physical violence were black men?
No, I did not notice that. That's
like I caught that and I was like, oh, that's, you know, I think they're like, I think there is a reason for it. I don't think it was just a fluke of casting, especially not with these movies. I think it's the same conversation we have about like black police officers today who are like part of the same problem of like people getting assaulted and whatnot. And it's out there where they're being subjugated and put into being forced into being cogs in this machine of violence that is, you know, hyper realized in this movie, but like a reflection of our real society.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
Fuck, man. I just love this movie. Like, it's so weird and wild. Like I want to talk about all the things about it, but it's at the same time, I'm like, isn't it cool? Isn't it fucking rad? Isn't this thing?
Yeah. And like, yeah, I just, again, like watching it over again, I was like surprised. I was like, oh, I can see why a bunch of my values, sort of like why I like this movie, because a bunch of my sort of values stem from anger of what is shown in this thing, and you could just like connect it all, and then like one of the things I wish they did more was touch on like class-based stuff, like
yeah,
because only the rich people could own apes like that and stuff. Yeah. So like, yeah, I just wish there was a little bit more show, like, and a little bit more history of how we just sort of got there in, what was it, like 20 years from the last movie.
Really 8 years again from the because there's the virus in 1983 that breaks out, and it's only from there that we get to the 1991 timeline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is like that disease doesn't exist unless they come back.
Well, they say it comes from space. My headcanon is that it is the same virus that happens in Rise, that like the apes all have it, and it's a future version of it, and it's airborne. So when when Cornelius and Zira come back, they bring the virus, and that's why we're starting to see the uptick in ape intelligence already.
Yeah.
Like that quickly. And like Caesar is born already, with the additional modifications that happen from time and all that. Yeah. So he's a little bit more advanced than all the other apes, but like just by being there, he is the catalyst for this acceleration of the timeline.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, yeah, that's one thing that I always laugh at every time I talk about this is like the virus in this timeline, it may not have existed if they didn't go back in time, but like, it's so like, I mean, like in doing like, having Caesar be the one who comes back and ends up being the leader, and then also doing that, it seems like a little too much for time travel. Like, should have been a little something else to kill all the animals and make the monkeys intelligent, but.
Well, I mean, this is all headcanon stuff because, like, for me, like looking at the Andy Circus ones, one of my gripes with it, and I only have a few like small ones, like this is super nitpicky, is that they don't make reference to just cats and dogs being dead. Like, we don't really see them in the movies anyway. I think there's like every now and then like a guard dog in like War and maybe in Dawn, but like it would have been really cool if that had been like a part of it, because we know that by the time we get to the ape future, birds are dead. There's no flying animals. They don't think flight is possible. And that's
there's one bird. Well, in Beneath.
Oh, it might be in the shot, but like there's a whole thing in the first movie where it's like, oh, flight is impossible, and thus like science, like they don't think you can even do it.
Yeah. Well, in Beneath, a monkey shoots a bush and then a bird flies out. He's like, oh, that's what the noise was. So no, but yeah, because like he makes the paper airplane. They're like, you could not fly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would just seem like a thing that you couldn't have in a society or in a world where birds exist. And it's possible that, like, for one thing, we know that there are massive striations between them all. And also, it just might be they didn't think about it.
Yeah. Like, besides that one scene, I don't really, like, remember any, like, birds throughout the whole thing. So, yeah. And, like, you would assume because everything's, like, all wild, like, dogs and cats would be rampant to run wild, but no.
It would be cool if they had just made it that detail there. But that's, again, just a headcanon thing to tie this all together, because I do think the movies like hold together interesting well for how little they clearly care about each other's continuity.
Oh, absolutely.
We're in weird spots, though, because there is an ape credited as Aldo, and Aldo is the name of the ape that Cornelius talks about in the previous one, being the leader of the uprising. So, like, there is a part of me being like, oh, was Aldo supposed to be the one? But Caesar being from this other timeline is also part of like why why time is forking in a weird way.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think it's that deep. Like I like these movies have a lot to say and they care a lot about some things, but I think they really don't care about some other things.
Yeah, like having Caesar's real name be Milo in Escape, like
yeah.
Like, you just
I rewatching it, I was convinced that the moment where he picks his name Caesar is the point where he gets named Caesar in the movie, and then it's like, oh no, but Armando's already calling him Caesar.
Yeah. It's interesting because I actually like had a moment. I was like, oh wait, is that how? Like the same thing happened to me. I was like, wait, is that when he got it? No, it's not. He just picked his name that he already had that Armando gave him, but maybe it was an alias, because he couldn't be Milo.
Right. I figure that he probably, like, the ape that was born in the circus was probably named Caesar, and thus he had to go by that name.
Yeah.
But then it makes me wonder, like, if he's incognito, why would he pick the name of the fugitive ape?
Oh, that's because he was just like, bitch, I'm a king. Did you see the way he looked at that guy?
Yeah.
He was like, oh, Caesar. I feel like that was more like a spiteful, I'm playing with you. I'm going to pick my own name and then look at you and see if you're smart enough to connect the dots. Also, it allowed them to make that king comment. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Because it pulls no punches and it has to have foreshadowing. It needs to be heavy.
It does.
Yeah, this movie has a couple of shots that made me think of, and the time, like this movie comes out first, so it's not like they're trying to do a send up. That made me think of the Conan the Barbarian movie from the 80s. Like specifically, the king stuff makes me think like king by his own hand. But also when he goes into, is that actually Lisa or is that a different chimpanzee that he's supposed to mate with? It looks like it's the same actress, but I'm not. Sure.
It looks like Lisa. I think it's her.
Either way, when he is sent to go impregnate the chimpanzee, and he has this sort of like goes up to the door, and there's like almost like this like cutesy like, well, I got things I got to do, which is like that's a little too chill about that whole situation.
That's very 70s of you, sir.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that shot is very similar to when they like give Conan a woman, and he like brings her in and like all that. I'm like, oh yeah,
cage.
Right.
They brought to many women. Fucking narrator in that show.
Uncle Iroh.
Yeah.
Yeah, this whole series is wild. Kale, you pointed out a thing, and this is going to be part of my pitch when we get to it, that there is less class infighting than you would expect in this movie. I would have liked some playing the apes against each other, like playing the gorillas against the chimpanzees against the orangutans. And I would have liked some more class infighting between the humans. Like, we get little bits of it, but not as much.
Especially like the protests and stuff, and like really the only person who breaks the thing up is the governor's assistant. Like, there should have been a lot more attention in that protest, I think.
Yeah. And honestly, there should have been, I mean, I know they kind of they hint at a different labor protest later on. Like, I would just feel like if you're a human, and especially if you're a human who is not part of the upper classes, then the apes are taking your jobs. Like, you've got Frank, which, by the way, I love that his name is Frank. You've got Frank serving like people water at restaurants, and you've got apes cleaning stuff up, and you've got like, them offering water and stuff like that. Like, those are now jobs that the restaurant owners no longer have to pay for, right? Like so that means that there are people who just don't have work. And there was like a thing like, well, the labor protest will end in 5 minutes. So like even the protests are very regimented. Like, but that was like over an intercom. Like, there's nothing to really state how like the humans who do not benefit from, for lack of a better term, the ape trade, and the ape slavery that is going on. How are they dealing with it? I mean, that's kind of an untouched kind of thing that could have definitely been touched here, because honestly, it would be a thing.
Yeah. And then you think about like in our world, like Fred Hampton, like stuff like that, like an allegory towards that would have fit perfectly in the story. Like someone who was like getting, like, if Caesar somehow convinced like lower working class people to join in on the riot, that would have been awesome and hilarious.
Which, if anyone could, it could have been Caesar.
Yeah,
honestly.
exactly.
Did you hear that speech?
Right.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, I want to die. Thanks, Caesar.
Yeah, it is. It's the thing with this movie is that it is so short, and it is so narrowly focused on this one specific uprising. It's not even like a larger like system of uprisings or anything, that we just get this one moment. It is so brutal and a gut punch, and it is living up to the expectations that we were given by previous movies. But I don't know who's watching this movie by itself. Like, it's not a thing that you're just like, despite the amount of catching up that they do for a person who hasn't seen the other movies, I don't know who's going in and only watching this one movie in the Planet of the Apes franchise and being like, I get it.
Well, honestly, if you're only watching this one, are you ever going to come back? Maybe. But I don't know. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah. It would, definitely watch it last, I guess. It definitely doesn't make you want to go watch the first one and watch 3 dudes swim naked in a lagoon.
Right.
The best scene in any movie I've ever seen. Like, just like, what are we looking at? Penises or feet print? I don't understand from this shot. Like, and like it does effectively what it goes towards. It's just like, I think to really like punch it home, there needed to be a little bit more, just a because it is short, so you could have added a little bit more about other places and other things. Because that's part of the speech at the end. Is it's just like, I mean, it worked here today, but what about tomorrow and stuff? Like you could still get defeated tomorrow, and then Siege's like, well, then we'll get back up and do it again until we get it right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Case, do you know? I know that the budgets for these movies kept getting smaller and smaller. What was the budget for this film?
Hey.
So this was $1.7 million.
Wow, that is much more than
Nice.
the fifth movie.
It is not the smallest budget that we're going to see. Well, or rather, it was already smaller by the time you get to battle, and it had a pretty good return. It made $9.7 million.
Yeah, that's that Roger
and, I mean, it's
Corman
1972,
thinking.
so it's cheap, but it's not quite. Like, so we recently talked about Halloween and how like incredibly cheap that movie was, especially in comparison with the movies that like made comparable amounts of money the same year as it. And obviously, like that's $300,000. That's a ridiculously low amount of money, and it's only 5 years after this. But a lot of movies were coming out in the 1 million range at this time. Not all of them had complicated ape prosthetics to go with it all. That this franchise is hard to do cheap because the whole thing, even though like every impulse is always like, can we get it cheaper? Can we get it cheaper? Like the whole thing that sells this franchise has always been like interesting special effects to make you cool within the moral messages they're trying to present in each of these movies.
Yeah. Well, they did a lot with this one because even like Escape, like that, the what is it? The circus gorilla looked terrible.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that they did the choice to make every ape look like a Planet of the ape.
Yeah. I think I think there's this element in the movies where we understand that they're human actors in the suits, but I think the humans in the scene are supposed to see them as like normal chimpanzees. Like, even though the first movie would lead you to believe that they are evolved to have more, upright posture, to have, more human proportions, like all these things. I think like the apes in Escape don't read to everyone as being not real apes. Like they don't read as like super evolved apes until they start speaking. Even when they start putting on their own clothes, where it's like, where'd they get those? They just had them.
They have a carpet bag.
So I think the idea is that like, okay, well, if they weren't wearing clothes, we would just see them. They would just like look like regular apes to us.
I mean, that's how Caesar snuck in.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. So when he sneaks in and we see the other orangutans, like then when he, when the orangutans walk in with him and they're put in their orange jumpsuits, all of a sudden they look like regular Planet of the Apes movies, like apes. Yeah, so I don't know. I the decision to have them in jumpsuits and to have, not to do much with like getting their proportions different, I think is overall fine. I find it frustrating that the actors don't really commit to being ape postures enough. Like there are way too many shots of all the humans in the suits just like standing upright because it, is hard to be in a hunched over posture like that.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like they should have just, made that work. Like there's too many shots of it, just like them just like walking around like chest up, and it's like that's not how you are supposed to be looking at this point.
Get that line director to do their job.
I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, but my back. So I sympathize.
I get it.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't.
I'm not saying they have to hold that posture. I'm just saying get the shot of, and then be like, all right, and cut, and then they go like,
Yeah, I mean, especially back in the day, because they could only shoot for 11 minutes at a time. So like, just give them a little bit better direction to be like, no, we're shooting right now, and then you can just lean against this wall for the next 3 hours because we got to go set up this shot over here. Making movies is hard.
And this one they didn't have a ton of money and they were making it work as best they could, and the point is not that they are super convincing apes. Like the point is that we're telling a slave uprising story where we're supposed to sympathize with the uprising, and they're getting away with it because it's a family-friendly sci-fi romp.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the movie actually does a really effective job of making you cheer for the apes and sympathize with the uprising and stuff like that. So I think that in that way, it's a very effective film, and kudos to that. And they did it for the family. So it's lovely.
They cut out all the violence for the family.
Yeah. Well, I think we are kind of circling about, like, we all just like this movie. And like there's nitpicks and tweaks that we would like to make. And I'm curious what those all are. Like, what are the things that we each like most strongly need to fix? But I think we've said our piece about like just the general qualities of this movie. Like, it's good. Yeah. Like, it's a good movie.
Good, especially for the budget.
Yeah, it's incredible for the budget. That, you know, sure, it's not the best movie you could make with these themes or with the subject matter. And we know that because Rise of the Planet of the Apes is the same movie, just like with a budget.
Yeah, like this thing has already had another pass thrown at it.
Yeah. Exactly. But I am curious, like, what we would have changed in this movie at this time, like the 70s, you know, the 1972 Uprising movie about a bunch of apes. Like, and so why don't we take a break, shout out one of the wonderful shows on our network, and when we come back, we will give some pitches.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun, whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
And we're back. All right, so Kale.
Yes.
We're talking about the Planet of the Apes movies. We've talked about how we like this movie. We all have expressed affection for this franchise. Obviously, I have a ton since I was pushing us to do all 5 of them back to back on the show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. We're gonna speculate on what could have been done realistically in 1972 with a $1.7 million budget, or if you want to justify a larger budget, explain how they would get the money. You know, like what they would do to like bring in anything. I am not allowed to go before Sam is the rule. So you can go first, or you can push Sam to go first because you are the guest. I'm just not allowed to be the first person to go.
Okay. I mean, I'll go first because I don't have too many notes about it. Again, I really enjoy this movie. But I do have like 3 or 4 notes about it. So my first note is I would change the virus to not be a paradox. Since, like I said before, there are 2 like time travel things specifically. So like I would just have it be like a natural phenomenon that happens, because it doesn't happen for like 10 years or something. It happens 8 years before the film takes place. But like that was a long gestation period for them to bring the virus back and for it to go into them killing the animals.
So I'm not actually sure if that is from them in the canon of this. Like my head canon is that it's the virus that came with them, but it says it came from space. But I don't think they're explicit that it came from Cornelius and Zira.
Oh, well, I just assumed that it was because they said the astronauts brought it back.
That's true. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think it contradicts, but I'm also just not positive that it's like flat out stated.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even like mention it coming from space or from astronauts at all. Like it would just be like a thing that happened and like was predicted by them.
I mean, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. That's like because again, it's just like Caesar is a time paradox. Like we should stick it to one. Like if they were to teach this in a writing class, that would be a rule. I would hope.
Stick to one paradox.
Yeah. One paradox. If it's not like, if time travel isn't the main plot point of your movies, which none of these are.
Right.
Yeah. It's just a thing that happens. Well, and like, even like in the originals, like it's like fairly well explained that because they're traveling at the speed of light, time around them is moving faster. Whereas like this one is like, because a nuke went off, they went back in time somehow.
Well, like in Beneath, it becomes like this whole thing where it's just like, oh yeah, we found a portal in space, and that's why I was able to come find you, and then I can bring you home. They at least like set up that as a possibility. Again, like it's the first movie is not a time travel story. It is the time passing. They just happen to not age very much for it. But then the second movie immediately is like, no, never mind. There was a portal in time. That's how that works.
Yeah, so that one, that's like a simple one. The next one I have here, I would say like have Armando die during that protest, like have it get more violent and more heated, and have Armando die and have it be an accident by one of the chimps or one of the apes do it, so that Caesar can like forgive him and then like can go on to sort of like what was that second one where there was the bad ape that he still kept around?
Kobo.
Yeah, Kobo.
And
yeah.
Dawn.
Yeah. So, something like that, to where it's like that even though he's mad at this ape for killing his father figure, he still forgives him because he realizes that the real enemy is humankind. So yeah, like that would be one. And also like that would also help with the budget, because you wouldn't have to pay Ricardo Montalban, just pay for 2 days instead of like the 3 weeks I'm sure he was there for.
Right.
So yeah, and then again, like my other thing is, even though it is more geared towards family, I would have loved to see it be more violent. Just add some more violence, and that's because I'm a sicko, and I'm also like 30, so I don't really give a shit about it. I don't have children, so I don't really care about it being family friendly. So yeah, because I think if they made it a little bit more violent, you would feel more, and like that ending would hit a little bit better. Not the theatrical one, but the extended cut ending would hit a little bit more if you saw how more violent the humans were towards apes.
Yeah, I mean, just like the extended cut, which like we said is probably pretty close to what the original test screenings cut looked like. Like just that alone, like it hits harder or there's no cushioning on that one.
Yeah.
It's just like straight up like, yeah, there's lots of blood. Like everyone's got like some kind of gash on their face. Everyone's got like blood splatter. It's weird looking blood splatter, but they got some kind of blood splatter. And yeah, it just ends with being like, yeah, shit's gonna burn. Credits.
Just Roddy standing there and then fade to black. Are you sure, Paul? That's how you want to end it? Yeah. Yeah, that was the other thing before I go on to my final point. Like Rod Sterling wrote the first one, and like then the same guy wrote all the rest of them. And like you could tell very much like Charlton Heston's character was very cynical. You're like, oh, this is definitely a Rod Sterling thing. And then yeah, it goes on to be less subtle and less cynical, but still good. And then like we kind of touched on this earlier, but I would say like the last thing I wrote is because they set up in Escape that basically what changed the apes becoming dominant was one ape said no. And so they do that in Rise of the Planet of the Apes when Caesar finally speaks. And it's not that big of a surprise here because he could speak from birth. But I would like my final note is have an ape besides Caesar say no, like actually talk and say no and stand up to it. And to bring it more lore accurate too.
Yeah.
Because they're like
they have an ape say no in the theatrical, but it's no to hurting humans.
Right. Yeah. It's Lisa.
Which is like doesn't hit the same way as someone standing up for themselves.
Yeah. See, I thought that was in the movie too, and then but I guess they took that out of the extended cut.
Right, because it's she says no after he finishes the first half, and then he picks up the second half where it's just like, oh, but also humanity. But yes.
Also we can maybe be friends.
Right.
Why can't we be friends? No, sorry.
Yes or no? Put a check mark next to yes or no, friends.
Yeah, it's like the kind of thing you could imagine like a Phil Hartman type character like giving a speech and like or like a Zap Brannigan who was supposed to be Phil Hartman, like where it's like giving a speech about like kill all the humans, and then someone whispers in their ears like that'll include you.
Yeah,
some of the humans.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I still, even after watching this like 10 or 15 years later, still enjoy this one very much, and still my secret favorite, besides the lagoon scene. I'm never gonna let that go. Like I can't believe I did not see that earlier when I've watched, because I watched it many times, the first one, and like I can't believe this is a G-rated movie, the first Planet of the Apes, and it's got like
you got the lagoon scene, and then you got the court scene where he's just standing there naked.
Oh yeah, that one I do remember, because that's also like one of my favorite scenes where they do the monkeys all do the thing. Yeah,
the monkey see, or like see no evil, hear no evil. Speak no evil. Yeah,
I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah, again, these movies are not subtle.
No,
none of them are. The most subtle is probably Rise somehow.
Yeah. But I mean, especially like the first one was like really good at like not being too like beating you over the head with it, but like it was just me. This is me like professing my love to how much I love Rod Sterling. But yeah, like that first movie, I thought again watching it now is like super genius, and like you can see how everything connects to real world stuff, and it's not like too like obvious, but still it's like if you missed it, you had to be pretty dumb.
No, I think those are solid points. I mean, like him saying no when instead of just saying filthy, or what was it, filthy human bastards, or
filthy human bastards.
Yeah. Like if he just said no to start with, and like that's caused everyone to like look back or something to that effect, like that at least would have been, like I said, lore accurate, and it would make a lot of sense. And it would be also kind of scary because, like, again, they've been all conditioned to respond to no that way. And he's instead the one saying it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. More powerful. But yeah, that's it for me. Yeah. I bet if I wasn't so, lazy and waited till the last possible moment, I could have had more, but yeah.
Well, again, I think this movie is also good. Like,
yeah.
You know, and it's part of a franchise. So like, you know, we are like, I don't think anyone's realistically going to be like, well, don't bring back Roddy McDowall. He had become the face of this franchise, even if it was under the mask. Like,
yeah,
you know, like, yeah, of course. And like Ricardo Montalban is like fucking great. So you're going to bring him back because of course.
Yeah,
like,
of course. If you have the ability to bring him back to anything, I mean, you know, Star Trek did it. So why not the apes? Except that was after.
Yeah. Well, and then then you're stuck in this situation where it's like, okay, that covers your 2 stars, and then everything else is like, all right, we only have so much money to shoot so much stuff. So like, it is a tight movie. Like you know, there's only so much wiggle room. We're not talking about like a back like to the foundation kind of rebuild on this movie.
No, and it doesn't really need it because it does have it. Well, I mean, most of the foundation is built from previous movies, but like, you know, the story is a very good story. The message is very potent, and like what they wanted to do with it was good. It's just, you know, there's some nitpicky issues that could have, you know, I think could have led to, like, especially if Armando died early on, and it was like it wasn't really like there wasn't, because like the interrogation of them like being like you knew you were in the same area as Zero and Cornelius was, so you must know something. Just, you know, that sort of drags on and could have been built towards something else. I mean, it does help with showing how even fascist they are towards just regular humans. But
yeah.
Sam, do you want to take the next swing?
Yeah, no notes. I love this movie. No, I'm joking.
Stop doing that.
I'm joking. But seriously, no notes. No. I will say, it really is a good movie. Like, honestly, you watch through it, it's compelling, and it moves really well. It moves very quickly. Would I have wished that there was a little more time? Yes. I wish that there was a little more time for breathing for Caesar to form relationships, especially with Liza. I can't remember her name now.
Lisa, yeah.
And I was like, I'm in the ballpark. Just to like kind of like cement this idea that like she's a partner, and especially if you're going to go with the theatrical and have him listen to her whispering of no, then I would have liked a little more build up. I mean, yes, you see, which is brilliant. I mean, honestly, it's amazing when you get those little, him like nodding behind an ape as they go to do something like that's slightly rebellious of their job and messing up the world, you know, just like, ooh, I was shining your shoes, but now I'm lacquering your socks, you know, like, and just like, I don't understand what's happening. The apes are malfunctioning kind of thing. But it speaks to a larger, tribute to the idea that workers have power, right? Because if you're not doing your job the way that the people that are telling you to do your job, then it trying to retrain you, it gums them up. They can't retrain all of us if we just all stop working. And so that's definitely in there. I think that's brilliant. But I do feel like I want more orangutans. Like, I don't want to feel like, I know that I want Caesar to feel like the king, but I want him to feel like he's building an actual kingdom. I don't necessarily get that in the film. And I mean, the best place is down in the underground, where like you could have a simple thing where an orangutan points something out to Caesar, like, oh, this is a good idea. Like, kind of not even like, it doesn't have to be even verbal. It can just be like, you know, kind of like him touching, and then a couple of like chimp noises, you know, monkey noises overall.
Apes together strong.
Right.
Yeah.
And just kind of be like, oh, yes. You know, and you can have like, you know, the actor who's playing the orangutan make some noises, right? And then you can have Caesar go, excellent idea, and then jot it down. It's that simple. It's less than a moment. Like it's so easy. So I would just have liked to see him form more of a council. He can still be the mastermind. He's definitely the mastermind. He is the person that is giving them the strength to move forward and move beyond. He is a beacon of hope. And you get that in the movie. But I just, I kind of, if I made one change to this, and only one change, thinking of like the budget and everything else, that would kind of be where I would enrich it. Even though I would love to add like labor stuff and things like that, I think the most important thing actually is just kind of enrich the future kingdom. And I actually really loved what Kale said about having one of the other apes say no. And I think it would be really interesting if like one of them, like maybe even like, let's say the garbage ape, the gorilla who threw all the garbage on the ground. What if someone like came up to him and was like, what are you doing? Pick it up. And then he was like, no. And then they were like, what? And that sends like the fascists into even more of a frenzy and kind of lights a fire under this underground rebellion that's really happening, right? Because now that gorilla has been punished, and like now Caesar has to step up because that gorilla has been punished and put down because he spoke, right? Like he's been murdered. And so it's like even clearer that we cannot be intelligent, we cannot be free until we have power, which is such a good line. And so I think like those are basically the changes that I would make, and it would be within the ape hierarchy to kind of like be like, oh, this is, you know, other than like being like, maybe we go a little more subtle, which like you could do, but fuck it. This movie's amazing. Let it hit hard. And yeah, let it be heavy-handed. We're being heavy-handed for the kids. This is a family movie. We're making sure the kids don't miss the point. You know, you're powerful. Slavery bad. Yeah, power to the workers. So
message
message received.
Universal income. Universal basic income.
Case, your turn.
Yeah, Sam, I like your concepts of having more of a hierarchy within the apes and like starting to see how he sort of uses his intellect to shape them into a force that could actually rebel. Like, I do like the scenes of them like bringing all the like tools and stuff in. Like those are pretty cool. Like building their arsenal and so forth. But it'd be fun if you start to see him kind of assign lieutenants to it all and like building some kind of structure.
Like he's really Caesar, you know, like he's really building his, you know, who is going to, you know, who has the strength, who's going to be my wisdom. His, like classic fantasy tropes. I want to see King Arthur's court created right now. Slightly, just glimmers of it. Just like we got the colorful jumpsuits. That's what I like.
Well, I mean, we're all kind of on similar pages. So one that I thought, or I was thinking about this thing, the ascendancy of ape intellect, I think should be sort of focused more on. Like, I like the moments where it's like, oh, look, like the average intelligence score has gone up 3 points in the last year or something like that. I think those are like good kind of moments there. And if we don't want it to be the virus or have it be tied in that way, I think that there is a really obvious element that this movie is missing that is hanging over its head and is supposed to be a part of every other version of this of this franchise, or at least up until this point, which is nuclear war. This movie is missing that directly, and I think that what we should have had is at some point in the interim, there should have been some small nuclear exchange. And I think that that should be the thing that, like, you could say that that caused some sort of viral outbreak, or, you know, irradiated virus or something that killed all the dogs and cats, and maybe that's part of it. And maybe you could set up that, like, oh, the exposure to radiation is causing apes to become smarter. Maybe like I don't mind the idea of a gorilla being the first one to say no. It could be Aldo. It could be, you know, one, it can set up a villain for battle where they just reuse the name, and it could be a setup so it stays with the lore and he says no, and like they, you know, all the cops come and they kill this ape, but it's, you know, other apes have seen it and it's starting to rise up, and like Caesar is moving kind of behind the scenes in that regard and takes the position of it.
He could be Aldo's brother. Then Aldo could revenge him. Oh gosh, I can't talk. Go ahead, Kay. Sorry.
Well, I was kind of thinking it's sort of like that episode of Deep Space Nine where they go back in time to like the riots in 2022.
Oh yeah.
And Cisco has to take the place of being the leader. But I think that having like some sort of like nuclear war being the justification for why they would need to shift towards having some sort of slaves cast and like to have some sort of like push towards like a fascistic society, I think that helps like kind of justify it in a way that's missing from this movie.
Yeah.
I also don't think it needs to be just 20 years in the future. I feel like it could be 40. Like, I feel like they could like Ricardo Montalban has like a grayish beard, but like he could have a stark white beard. Caesar could be a little bit older. Roddy McDowall's like 40 in this movie, so it's like him playing an 18-year-old chimpanzee. He's just not that agile, and like that's no strike against him. He's just an adult, and like, you know, you could just play him as being like a little bit older, like have Caesar be a little bit older, and it's like, yeah, that's why he's able to like insert himself in as like an alpha member of the society, or whatever kind of terms we want to use for it. Like, you know, but work with it that way. And then what we were kind of talking about, that I would like more striations in society. I think that the apes should be pushed against each other. Maybe gorillas are being used as sort of subservient security forces by the police. You know, like maybe that's sort of why they get pushed into this cycle of violence that they would inherit in perpetuity. You know, maybe it'd be nice to see more of the orangutans being used for those kind of administrative tasks, and maybe chimpanzees are being... I don't like that they're filing because they're not supposed to be able to read. Like, I think that's dumb, but I think if they're being used to like assemble stuff with their hands, or like work in factories, to do all the kinds of jobs that like you need a modicum of intellect and nimbleness in your, or, you know, dexterity. Like you like go, like put them to work in that kind of capacity.
Like assembling guns.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Like, or whatever. But if it's a wartime kind of state, that also makes sense why they'd be ramping up like production of weapons. So you have that going on there. And so that, because the essential collapse of human society isn't because the apes rise up. The collapse of human society is because human goes to war with human, and apes just happen to be there to pick up the pieces when humanity has been wiped off the playing field. So like, we do need to remind people that is the point of the first movie. And that's why I think that we should have those kind of nuclear exchanges there. I think that in this police state, we could still have a version of an aristocracy, that we could kind of see some manipulations going on between people, like different factions, maybe like working with, you know, trying to oppress like the middle class, who are then like, or middle class and like lower classes, who are then being presented against the apes, who are being put in as their like, you know, slave replacements that are being pushed here, so that these humans can then go off and be put to war or something like that. Like, we're like, you know, being pushed toward the war effort, and now we have slave labor. It could be used to justify why we're like gathering up all these apes from Africa and Asia, like that, like, oh yeah, there is a small nuclear exchange and we've taken over these territories and we're shipping them back to help with the war effort over here, kind of thing. And I think it'd be kind of interesting if, like, yeah, we've got the governor, we've got his assistant, and we've got Culp. And, like, Culp is already kind of set up that way. Like, he's already this, like, spy master type character, who looks like he's trying to vie against McDonald. So, like, I think that have more of that. Like, we have that one, I think it's Mrs. Riley, Lisa's owner. Like, you know, we have some interesting cuts to her at, like, locations she's at. It would be nice to, like, show up a little bit more of that. Like, have the idea that, like, there is this upper crust, and maybe they don't even really pay attention to the apes. Like, they don't care. They don't think the apes are the threat. They're worried about this like nuclear war thing that's going on.
Yeah.
You know, the whole nuclear war thing. Like, but like they've got, you know, it's this idea that like classes in society don't see the ones that are two below or two above. Like, you see the ones that are directly above and below you because they're the ones that impact you directly. And so like maybe we have a lot of people who don't even realize until it's too late. Like they just, casually were buying and selling apes or moving things around, like creating circumstances for the apes to be in trouble. And they didn't even process that it could be a problem. That's kind of reflected in Rise with like the guy who runs the like pharmaceutical company. Like he doesn't think that the apes are going to have an uprising in it. And when they do, like all of a sudden it's a comeuppance. But like they were beneath his notice prior to, aside from the fact that they were guinea pigs for a drug.
Yeah. The text in this movie actually already supports this too, because at one point at the restaurant, one of the women say, I don't even think they're fun anymore now that I'm not afraid of them.
I thought she was talking about cigarettes at that spot, but either way, like, like this idea that they have. She was
talking about the apes, because I took it as like Frank is there and he's lighting things, and it's just like, ugh, they're like whatever, like they're just here. They always do what we tell them to do. They're not dangerous anymore. This future that people think is going to happen is not going to happen.
Yeah, but I think them like kind of just like dismissing these slaves as being happy to be there. Like they think like, oh, we gave them a cookie and they're good, and like they're isn't it so much better than if they were like still in their native Africa? Like that's some real explicit text right there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just think like have a little bit more infighting. Have some infighting with the apes. Like I thought it like while I like that Caesar bonds with orangutans at the beginning because it feels like set up for his relationship, or at least the lawgiver relationship in the future stuff, like the hierarchy of orangutans. Like it would be interesting if Caesar was abused somewhat by apes that were already in this sort of like prison setup, because that is how like we put those kind of power structures in place. Like we do make some of the job of at least enforcing like social norms on other prisoners that we are abusing, and like that it's a chain that's like going downwards from the highest up points. So like we've got these cops who are lower class citizens than this aristocracy, and their whole job is just to abuse these apes, and maybe the apes should be pitted against each other. It's the way, like, for example, the British were able to maintain rule over lots of places when they were doing their whole be in Britain thing. Mm-hmm. Like one of the reasons why like there's so much bad blood when we're looking at like India versus Pakistan is because they were they were pitting the people that they had conquered against each other as a way of preventing the violence from going upwards. Instead, it was going laterally. And I think that we should see that reflected here. And I don't know if this movie was smart enough to have those kind of, cultural history and whatnot is cumulative. Like we have more discussions. We are more aware of these discussions. The internet has made it easier to have these discussions and to be like somewhat versed in terms of like how oppression works. And I'm not sure like how much work it would have been for Paul Den at the time to have gotten up there. But like, I feel like that's what we're trying to talk about here. I feel like it's not that novel to talk about like how oppressive forces are going to pit their subjects against each other as a way of dividing and conquering and maintaining that power. And I think it would have been good to have that reflected in this movie, because that's the one thing I think is really missing from this movie, where it's like, what aside from cops are humans using to like enforce the apes? And I think that there should be some manipulations going on, and I think that would help a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, it would just lead into like that ending would be so much more powerful if by the end all of the gorillas came together to do the thing, to do the fight. Yeah.
And then to do the fight in reverse slow-mo, because we didn't actually talk about that being one of the things they did to like have the gorillas not murder the guy. They just took the footage and reversed it.
Yeah.
So that the gorillas like raise the rifles to kill him, and then they just like lower it and then they cut away.
Yeah. It was amazing.
They love doing that, because like in Escape, the final scene is just the monkey going like, just they keep looping the same clip, like doing a boomerang with it. Mama, mama. Like, yeah, you could just see like some of the stuff they were doing backwards. Like at one point it looked like the apes were backing up instead of going forward because they used too much footage already of that.
Yeah, I mean, low budget movie. They were pulling out a lot of tricks just to get it to the 88 minutes. So I don't know.
Look, they got one shot.
Yeah, like all of the speculation. I'm trying to keep it stuff that could have just been dialogue.
Right.
I think there's only so much power that they had in terms of like remaking this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like a lot of this stuff our issues had to be fixed in like pre-production script level.
And honestly, did it need it? No. It was great. It was a great movie. Didn't need another pass at all.
Yeah, it hit the right amount of notes. It's just things that I like to write about, like class, is I would like to see more representation, especially in like a 70s movie where, you know, it was there, but not like totally on the forefront of people's minds like it is today.
Yeah, I mean, again, like this is a franchise I love. Like even the worst of them, I still will watch and enjoy. But this is not the worst of them. This is like, you know, I don't feel like it's fair to compare the Circus ones with these in terms of like where they are in my hierarchy, because like it's kind of its own franchise. But like of these 5, like Conquest is very close to number 2. It's either number 2 or it's number 3, and it's a close number 3 kind of, because again, like the first one's just historic and like monumental, and there's so much, you know, there's so many amazing things going on in the original Planet of the Apes. And then Escape is so fun, and also is like this fun, you know, inverse of the first movie. And then you've got this one, which is so brutal and so, you know, like so stark, and like has such, like the message is just there. The movie is this one message, and we're just going to hit you home with it. And then you got Beneath and Battle, and neither of them are, you know, quite live up to the other 3 in the franchise. But like this one's just such a good one. And it's wild, and it's scary, and it's you know, or scary in the sense of like, you know, it's scary incidents that are going on, like the visuals of it all, of a chimpanzee standing before a city on fire as it like cackles about the birth of the Planet of the Apes, is a wild thing to end even the theatrical cut on, regardless of if he said like, oh, it will be kind of nice to some of you.
Well, especially because like it is such a strange tone shift, like when you watch it, because it's just like he gives this amazing speech, and that day is today, and then you just hear Lisa go, no. And he goes, we'll be okay. God wants us to be kind. And it's like, wait, what? Like, and it's exactly like you said. Someone whispered to you, sir, you will also fail and die. Oh, well then.
Right.
Those of you who wish to become our slaves, we will be kind to you as our slaves. Because he doesn't say he's going to live in harmony or peace with the humans. He just says that they're going to be more humane to their slaves.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, man, I'd love to see the test, like whatever that original test score audience was. I'd like to see the score of that, see if it's better or worse than Batgirl.
I'm sure some of them were uncomfortable with the only heroic human figure being McDonald.
Yeah. This was in the 70s, early 70s.
So sad that he doesn't continue. Like they recast him in the next movie, but they don't recast him per se. It's his quote unquote brother. But he clearly is clearly they wrote the part and just couldn't get Harry Rhodes to come back, which sucks, because he does a great job in this movie.
Yeah,
I think
he
that
does amazing.
he's fantastic. We also didn't really like shout out some of the other performers. Like we talked about how Culp is like way more effective in this movie than in Battle. But Don Murray as Governor Breck apparently is fluent in German and wrote out all of his lines in German so that he could practice that delivery, and then took the delivery and brought it back to the English.
Oh, wow.
So that he could have it be more of a Nazi cadence. And I'm like, that's really cool. Like there's so much good stuff going on in this movie. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it and you like the Planet of the Apes concept, like check this one out.
Yeah.
It's a gut punch, but it's also only 90 minutes. So it's not like it's going to be a huge investment on your time. It's just fucking wild and scary and crazy, and is you know,
and I loved it.
Yeah, it's and you can't help but enjoy it, because it's really good.
Yeah,
it's a good movie that was definitely made in 1972, but it's still a good movie.
Yeah, and it's just it's one of those, since like it's further back in the catalog. Like, you know, by the time you get through Beneath or Escape, you might not like want to go on to this, but you definitely should. Or, you know, just skip Beneath and then watch Escape. And
yeah. You don't need to watch Beneath to understand this one. And honestly, I mean, again, we've said that this is not like a solo type of movie, but if you really want to, and you read the cliff notes or watch the trailer to Escape, you can just watch this one, because Armando will tell you exactly what happened and where you're standing in the first 10 minutes of the movie. So if you want to, you can. I think you should watch Escape. But if you don't want to and you just want to watch this one, watch the last trailer and then just jump on in.
Yeah, just jump on it. Definitely watch this. More people should watch this. It's definitely a really good watch, especially if it's 2 a.m. and you're like, oh, I got to do a podcast tomorrow.
Yeah. I am curious for any listeners who have not watched any of the Planet of the Apes movies, if you've just never seen any of them and you're a loyal listener and you just have it on because, like me, you don't like having a podcast downloaded that you haven't listened to yet on your player and you just want to check off the list. I'm curious if go watch this one by itself. I'm very curious what your response is going to be because I don't know. I can't imagine just that scenario. And you, listener, can be part of this glorious experiment to do one of the craziest things I've ever described, which is see Conquest of the Planet of the Apes by itself.
That would be an interesting world. Imagine a world where you grew up, but your parents only had Conquest as their only Planet of the Apes VHS. What a wild world. Yeah.
What a wild household to grow up in. That's a real fight the power kind of house.
Yeah.
But this is why we're doing this this retrospective on the Planet of the Apes movies. We're going backwards from Battle. We're now on Conquest. Next time we'll be talking about Escape. Spoilers. But it's such a fun thing to look at this whole franchise. So, Kale, thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Yeah, it's fun.
So for people who want to find you and follow you, give all your plugs again, what you got going on.
Twitch.tv/Kale Ryder. This week I should be getting back to a normal schedule since I just, I think this will be my 4th week at my new job. So just started and I was getting all that stuff together and had to do a bunch of stuff. But yeah, follow me there. Follow me at Kale Ryder on Twitter and then at Kale Del Ryder on Instagram and TikTok. I sometimes do crazy things. You can watch the best clip in Planet of the Apes on my TikTok right now. Yeah, just follow me there. I do a lot of, especially on TikTok and Twitch, I do a lot of talk like this, analyzing movies or talking about what's going on in the business. Again, the HBO Max stuff. I got on such a high soapbox about that. So, and we're still hearing all the bullshit that's coming through with that. So that's fun. But just find me there.
Yeah, everyone should check that out, and everyone should find your isolated clip of "quote unquote" the best scene in Planet of the Apes for some private time.
I'm going to think of Kale when we watch that movie in a couple of weekends. So
yeah,
I hope the listeners will be thinking about Kale as well.
Yeah.
When we review it.
If the listeners aren't thinking about Kale, they might be thinking about you, Sam. Where can they find you and follow you?
They can find me here at Another Pass. And they can find me on our Discord server if you want to come and tell us if you watched this movie all on its lonesome.
Please, I hope you exist, and I hope this happens. I can't express that enough.
Please watch it. Please let us know. I will actually start checking just so I don't miss it because I want to know. Other than that, I'm just, doing monotonous work for my overlords and I am unavailable. And so if you have anything to complain about, anything I said or anything else you can turn to my supreme overlord, Case, and find him at
well, you can find me on Twitter at Case Aiken. You can find the show on Twitter at Another Pass. You can find more episodes of this show and so many other great shows at certainpov.com, such as I'm going to give a shout out because this weekend they're doing a panel that we're recording this, which is Fun and Games with Matt and Jeff. Matt, Jeff, and this weekend Rachel Corky Shang are all doing a panel at FlameCon. So that's a cool shout out. It also tells you when we recorded this versus how many months from now when this episode actually drops.
I was going to say.
But Fun and Games is a great show where they have conversations about gaming, about the industry, about all these facets of it without just being a review or a hype machine kind of focus. It's more about an introspective look at the video game industry. So check that out. And then in addition to their bi-weekly episodes, they do side quests where people get to gush about a video game that really meant something to them. That's also, some really awesome things to look at. We now have animated versions of a lot of them. I think I just finished working on the 90th episode to be animated at this this point. The show's at like 160 now. And that is that you can find on our YouTube channel, where you can also find like tons of cool clips that we're putting out for this show, for Men of Steel. We're putting out Superman analog videos, so check out our YouTube channel. And then head back over to certainpov.com, where you can find the next episode of this show. Now, I already spoiled it, but Sam, what are we talking about next time?
Next time, we'll be talking about Escape from the Planet of the Apes. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
All right. Let's do that clap so we don't forget like we did last time.
To be fair, we've only forgotten once, so...
Right, but it was the previous Planet of the Apes one where...
Yeah.
we got to the break. We're like, oh, we said we would clap, but we never did.
I was just like, hey, Case, we didn't clap. So, bad on Case. I remembered. Too late.
Yeah, Matt, I'm the bad one. In all circumstances, blame me, not Sam. Case is the bad one.
I'm sure that Matt agrees with that. I don't even need to hear his response. I can hear it in my head. So, yeah. Ads here. Dr. Zaius. Sorry, can't do
Dr. Zaius is fungal foot cream. Get it now.
Can I play the piano anymore? Well, of course you can. Well, I couldn't before.
And thus became the foot fungus craze of the animal kingdom, brought down to you because of Escape at that fucking CGI Dr. Zaius. Oh my god. I love that dude.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it because it's like not part of this movie. It's just like a weird thing for the Blu-ray, but like, yeah.
I love him. I want him to sing me a lullaby to sleep every night so I can have gorgeous nightmares of his face.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.